Every generation has its fair share of challenges. I'm acutely aware that if I was born 40 years earlier, I might have found myself conscripted into the jungles of Vietnam, or my grandfather's generation, I might have been one of the rats of Tobruk, or a generation before that, of course, there was the fields of France where 22 million men lost their lives. But having said all this, something very different has happened in this generation, particularly amongst our young men and boys. 1 in 3 Australian men aged 16 to 24 now meets the criteria for a mental disorder. Anxiety disorders affect more than 1 1/4, and affective disorders 1 in 10, and suicide is now the leading cause of death for young Australian men, surpassing car accidents and disease. And Australian men are an outlier globally. Men generally have higher suicide rates than women at 2.3 times higher. But in Australia, and it's similar in the UK and the US, the suicide rate for men is 3.1 times higher. Tim, you've been giving a lot of thought to this policy space, particularly what's happening with our young men and boys. Can you explain to me what's going on? What is happening in this generation?
I can. And just to sort of put it out to you to start with, who here has got a son or a grandson? And who is worried about their future because they're male? A not insignificant number. And it's kind of extraordinary how we got here. And I think some fairly big forces have unfortunately crashed at the same time. On the sort of societal level, we've had big changes. And let's be generous, some of them were long overdue. You know, feminism, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, DEI. You can talk to luxury beliefs, but you know, if we're generous, we can say that there was a need for some sort of correction. But these big forces have unleashed several very damaging things. One is a loss of empathy for men and boys, and partly that's driven by things like cultural Marxism, which divides the world into oppressed and oppressor. And if you're male, you're automatically an oppressor, you're bad. And it lumps all men together as one homogenous block. Oh, men are doing fine, look how dominant they are at the top of politics and the top of business. But yeah, some men are doing really well and have had a great time of things. But a lot of guys are really struggling out there in this economy. And the mental health rates, the prison rates, the homeless rates, the addiction rates, all attest to that. And against that, we have the economic factors. We are basically cavemen still. We are hunter-gatherers at heart. We've been, since the 2 million years of Homo erectus, we haven't really evolved an awful lot. The economy is central to who we are as men and our identity. What we do, our work, our living, is how we, for better or worse, get our status and our sense of who we are. And in these times with collapsing working class jobs, with the collapse of mines and factories and middle class jobs for life going, there has been a huge collapse in the sense of who you are with that. And this comes together to coalesce around an incredibly powerful emotion, and that's loss. You don't look like a bunch of degenerate gamblers. I might be wrong. I don't know what happens here in the evening. But loss is an incredibly powerful emotion. It's twice as powerful as pleasure. If you lose something, that's what really keeps you awake at night. You know, look at the gambler chasing their losses. Men have lost their sense of identity. They've lost the chance to do better than their fathers. They've lost that sense of camaraderie from work. They've often lost their mental health. They've lost father figures. There's a huge amount of loss that comes along. And that leaves men primed for populism, because you are so desperate to get back what you've lost that you'll reach for the false prophet. You'll reach for your kind of Andrew Tates. You'll blame the other. You know, 'twas ever thus, you'll blame the Jews, you'll blame a different gender. And that leaves us in an incredibly volatile situation. So we're in this situation because of these huge social factors. We've stopped caring about men and boys and treating them as individuals. Men have lost their raison d'etre. And you have this incredibly powerful feeling, this sense of loss, which I think leaves us incredibly vulnerable. And I'd love to say things are going to get better, but I think once AI comes and losses and job cuts really kick in, boy, I think things are going to take a turbulent turn for the worse.
So I'm curious, is this just a challenge with our young men, or is there something, a generational gap that is emerging? And I know you've been thinking quite a lot about young girls and some of the challenges they're facing, how their identities are being shaped and formed. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit to how our women are experiencing the world at the moment now as well.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar, actually. I think my main argument is really that the foundations that previous generations depended on, and this is true for men and for women, have basically fallen away, whether that's through family breakdown, whether it's through the collapse of communities, whether it's through the decline of religion. Young women and young men just have far less to hold on to in this world. And I argue that since the rise of social media, that's become our world. You know, now we turn inwards and we focus endlessly on ourselves because we don't have these foundations anymore. My argument is that young women have actually become something more like products rather than people because of the pull of social media and that replacing all forms of belonging and identity. So now we have young women who live to perform their lives on Instagram, who display themselves on dating apps, who turn themselves into these perfect personal brands. And I think that's the main reason why young women are unhappy, because so much of their life is these simulations and substitutes for the things that we've lost. And I think we're unhappy because we're no longer human.
There is that real disconnect with the fact that we've never been wealthier as a people, like our ability to consume, to have all these products, and yet there is this sense of malaise and pessimism. And Rob, I'd love to bring you in, because you really coined this idea of luxury beliefs. And I'd love to pick your brain on how that is shaping this generation. I've got a couple of stats here. So there was a survey of 10 countries, around 10,000 people, 16 to 25, back in 2021. And it found that 59% were very or extremely worried about climate change, with 45% saying it negatively affected their daily functioning. It was impacting their daily lives. And then a further study in 2025 found that of those 16 to 24, 20%, so 1/5, were afraid of having kids because of the impact on the climate. I wonder if you could talk to us about this concept of luxury beliefs and how is this software, this way of thinking about the world, completely disconnected from maybe our material lived circumstances, but really reflects our digital selves?
Mm-hmm. Well, I should first define luxury beliefs. Luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the affluent and the credentialed, while inflicting costs on those lower on the socioeconomic ladder. And a core feature of a luxury belief is that the believer is sheltered from the consequences of his or her belief. And so some of the things we've been discussing on stage, this idea that having children is to be stigmatized, it's problematic in some way. This idea of anti-natalism, this movement, well, many of the people who push this idea themselves are in very comfortable, affluent situations, and even if they were to live by their own values, they are in a position to later invest in sort of fertility treatments and all these kinds of things. They could find ways to have children later in their lives, whereas for most people, they don't have those options. And so if they imbibe this view that having children is wrong, then they may miss their moment later in life. And so this is one version of this kind of cost. Another, we've been talking about smartphone use and device use, technology. Well, there have been many cases of tech entrepreneurs publicly saying, I don't let my children use these devices. Steve Jobs famously wouldn't let his children use iPads. There are recent examples, versions of this as well. And so they're profiting from this technology. Technology was supposed to be the great educational equalizer, and instead what we're seeing is a lot of people becoming addicted to these devices. And there is kind of class-based divergence here, where if you look at children raised in families that earn less than $50,000 a year and compare them to children raised in families that earn more than $100,000 a year, the children in those poorer families spend twice as much time using screens. So it's the difference between 3 hours a day versus 6 hours a day. And so this is yet another example of this. And so these luxury beliefs, you mentioned the material factors here. Well, if it were true, that material factors determined human fate, and I'm channeling one of my favorite authors here, Theodore Dalrymple, who said, if it was all down to material factors, then we should all still be living in caves. But we're not. Culture matters, ideas matter. The ideas that are propagated by those who are at or near the top of society matter. Now, sometimes people will challenge me on this. Okay, these elites have these luxury beliefs. What is the mechanism through which these people at the top of society, they're espousing these views and then they affect everyone else? How does that happen? There's a lot of research on this about how people with influence and prestige and so on do wield disproportionate influence on culture, discourse, policy, and so on. But I can explain this with a simple example. I can illustrate this. You could imagine tomorrow you wake up and it seems that collectively people who have a lot of influence, so politicians, CEOs, influencers, people who write television shows and movies, they all seem to be converging on a similar idea, which is that littering is actually not a big deal anymore. If you want to throw trash out the window, if you want to discard anything you want just out on the street, this is perfectly fine. Your favorite new TV show that's streaming, you see very attractive and interesting characters just tossing trash on the ground, and it's completely destigmatized. And in fact, if you say that littering is wrong, you're the problem. You're holding people to these outdated norms. You're being oppressive. Stop judging people for littering. And that becomes the kind of elite line. Would anyone be surprised if years from now, a generation from now, you start seeing garbage piling up on the streets and you notice that there's a difference based on socioeconomic status? The gated neighborhoods, the affluent neighborhoods are still relatively pristine, but if you go to low-income areas, suddenly you see piles of trash everywhere. Well, this is an example of how something can have a disproportionate impact. A luxury belief can affect people lower on the ladder than people higher, despite the fact that this idea is espoused by those higher up. I can give one more example of this, if I may, about this divergence between boys and girls. So if you ask conservative American parents, are you more concerned about boys in America or girls in America? They say, I'm more concerned about boys. And then you ask them, are you more concerned about your sons in America, as you're raising them, or are you more concerned about your daughters? And conservatives say, I'm more concerned about my boys. If you ask liberal parents, are you more concerned about girls, abstractly, or boys? They say, of course I'm more concerned about girls, got to be a good feminist. But if you ask them, are you personally more concerned about your sons or your daughters? They say, I'm more concerned about my sons. And so I think it would be helpful if people would publicly espouse the views that they privately abide by.
Constantine challenged us in his comments earlier that we might be at the beginning of the tough times and there could be more tough times ahead, and it might be up to our kids to solve some of these problems. But I'm not satisfied with that, and I'd love to think, what can we do now to begin to reconstruct what is clearly fraying at the edges? We only have a couple of minutes, but I wonder if I start with Freya and then Tim to come in. What does rebuilding look like? How do we actually begin to wind this back, give boys a purpose again, decommodify our girls, bring the sexes back together as companions and not as competitors? And what would that look like? How do we need to live?
I think both sexes really need to be human again, and a big part of that is being vulnerable with one another. I think that both young men and young women are so scared of getting hurt and betrayed and let down and have something else fall apart that they just have this defense mechanism and this guard up. And I think I see this with young men and young women online more than ever. It's just contempt for the opposite sex and caricatures of one another. But I think if you can be brave enough to actually come together, I think that's one of the most sort of countercultural things we can do now, is just be honest and vulnerable and say that we need each other.
Tim, in 30 seconds.
I think we need to sort of ditch the ideology and just start from the basic principle of, what does a boy need? Let's park all the isms and say, well, a boy needs to be able to be a boy, and that means, boys from the moment they're born need to be more active, more boisterous, more tactile in their learning. They need to feel part of a tribe. They need role models. They need fathers around. They need that sense of support, that sense of love and vulnerability. And they also need to feel that they've got a future, that they're wanted in this world. When they look at DEI workplaces, and when they look at educational systems, when they look at how badly they and their peers are doing in class, they kind of already feel like they're on the back foot. So boys are a microcosm of what's going wrong with young men. We need to give them a sense of future, and a sense of being a boy isn't a bad thing. It can be joyous.
It can be joyous. Could you please get up for Tim, Rob, and Freya?